Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. We're starting a new series this week covering stereotypes.
Stereotypes are apparent in almost every aspect of our lives, which is what we are going to talk to you guys about today. I'm one of your co-hosts, Arya.
And I'm your other co-host, Emily.
Now, let's imagine a world where everyone looked at you through a judgmental filter in order to sort you into a societal standard. This is not a far stretch of imagination, considering that this lens has already become part of our reality. These are stereotypes, and by textbook definition, a stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing.
Personally, when I think of stereotypes, what comes to my mind is an image of a specific stereotype, like a jock or a nerd, and these, like other stereotypes like that, can create a lot of division in any environment. Now let's take a closer look on how deeply rooted stereotypes are in our society. At this point, we've grown up with stereotypes for so long that we're practically professionals.
You know, Emily, I feel like sometimes I've used so many stereotypes in my everyday life and I didn't really notice it until I thought about it later.
Yeah, same. And to everyone listening out there, pause this podcast and think about what stereotypes you might have used in the past or even just today.
All right, everyone back. If you have used a stereotype before, that is okay. The first step to fixing an issue is to realize that there is an issue to fix, so we're on our way already. Now let's think again. Have you ever been stereotyped by somebody else before? Take another pause and think about how it made you feel and what the situation was.
So, if you have been stereotyped, I'm pretty sure it didn't feel the greatest. You could have been the victim of hate speech, or something about your identity was the target of a joke, and you might have been told to chill about it. There are many things in our everyday lives and can come through in forms of bullying or even just stereotypes we accept because they're part of our society.
And the problem with those societal stereotypes is that no one realizes they are stereotypes. It's become so normalized that we just accept it, and unless you are part of the group being stereotyped, we tend to just turn a blind eye to those who might be hurt in this societal issue. And if you have used a stereotype before, as we said, you know that you might not have done it on purpose. It could have been unintentional, and the people stereotyping you might not realize it either, so it's important to keep that in mind.
But whether it's intentional or not, the people who are stereotyped can suffer very serious mental health issues, especially teenagers, because they're in the process of finding their own identity, all while society is trying to label themselves. These stereotypes place people into confined boxes, and they don't necessarily fit into them just to label them as something. These labels may be wrong or just don't show the whole picture.
Now, we are not saying that society is evil and we should have like an anarchy, or that anyone who has used a stereotype is a terrible person inherently. But it is important to bring awareness to this segmentation before it gets to the point where we have a divergent-like society.
Alright, first, let's talk about stereotypes at school. We are both currently in school, so we can share some first-hand experiences. Stereotypes at school are used by teachers, students, sports coaches, parents, and the list goes on. And as we said before, the using of stereotypes might be unintentional or purposeful. For starters, gender and dress coding is a huge and widely held stereotype. Girls in the hallways will get dress coded for showing too much skin, meanwhile guys can take their shirts off during athletic practices and not have any negative consequences. These experiences can be seen a lot by students firsthand, including us, and it just creates an uncomfortable environment to be in.
Sort of like the example Emily said, once I had a sports coach tell me that girls shouldn't wear sportswear that's meant for hot weather in practice because it's too revealing and women, quote unquote, have to maintain a proper image. This was when we were having a hot May track practice right before meet, so it was very rigorous, and there were many males who had their shirts off. And I was honestly like flabbergasted that people in this day and age still thought that way. Another one I've seen in my friends or even just other students is being unofficially ranked at school based on race. I've heard people tell me, oh, you're Asian, so you must be smart. Or if someone asks me what classes I'm taking, they're like, of course you're taking all advanced classes because you're Asian. While it's not necessarily an insult to me, it creates an uncomfortable situation, and if some things were switched around and it was targeted towards someone else, it can be an insult. So it is important to remember that while the person you are stereotyping or using a stereotype on may not be insulted by it, it could potentially insult someone else. It's important to be mindful with your words and not use stereotypes because while it is not always insulting directly, someone is always categorized incorrectly, and by being mindful, you can combat this.
Yeah, that's very important. I was also thinking that even in extracurriculars outside of school, one thing I experienced firsthand was based off my gender through a stereotype. I found it odd that people are surprised when I tell them I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, even though I've been doing martial arts for 10 years now. The opinion is based solely on the fact that a girl could never be so involved in a physical contact sport, because what comes to mind when I think of these sports is a guy. Things like, you're good at this sport for a girl, or in other cases, you're smart for someone who's pretty, these things are called microaggressions. These little comments are a purposeful use of stereotypes that are not okay. And if you catch yourself using a microaggression or catch someone else using one, make sure to take time to figure out what it is and why it could be wrong, and look at the situation differently in order to not use microaggressions again.
Microaggressions are a widespread issue, but they can be easily fixed if you are mindful, and they are not the most harmful outcome of stereotypes. Scaled quite a bit up from microaggressions can come the crime and violence, and some people experience this outcome in a very detrimental manner. If we take a look back at the early months of 2020, we see that there are a lot of reports of East Asians being targeted and physically harmed based on their skin color, for the sole reason that there was a learned stereotype becoming apparent. This stereotype wrongfully correlated this population for being responsible for the spread of COVID-19. In technical terms, this situation is called prejudicial bullying or bullying based on stereotypes. Another representative situation that involves prejudicial bullying based on stereotypes is the ongoing state of Islamophobia that began to grow a lot after the events of 9/11. Many people began to fear Muslims because of the completely inaccurate stereotype that Muslims were terrorists. This stereotype was pushed by the news and the public into society. Because of that, Islamophobic incidents and even physical attacks had a major increase sparked by the stereotype. Children were bullied by their peers and teachers and any other people older than them, excluded for social activities, all because of their religious identity. And adults had trouble finding and keeping jobs and had to experience workplace harassment because of that ignorant stereotype. Now, Emily, why are these societal stereotypes and prejudicial stereotypes so hard to get rid of?
Well, they're really hard to get rid of because they're so deeply rooted in our society, and that means that they're harder to unlearn and are more subtle, which can make them harder to realize that they're wrong in the first place. They can come from personal upbringing, school social environments, or even the widespread media. And as mentioned before, these can lead to verbal, physical, and even cyberbullying. People, especially kids, who grow up being bullied based on these stereotypes can struggle with their self-image and self-worth, and they create an overall negative environment to grow up in. At school, when a child is targeted by bullies who base their targets on religion or race because of stereotypes, a person can feel like a piece of their identity is worthless. This is because they're being shown by their surroundings that they're being perceived as an outcast. Mentally, especially in teens who are working to solidify their identity, this can cause social anxiety in the sense that they're experiencing a loss of self-confidence and may end up feeling the need to unnecessarily change themselves for other people or to fit in. It's essential to keep in mind how big of an impact yours or someone else's words could potentially have, and to be mindful of others' feelings on the receiving end of these types of jokes and bullying situations. By taking others' feelings into account, it's a lot easier for us to not use those stereotypes.
All right, so today we covered stereotypes in the school environment, microaggressions, and prejudicial bullying. Be sure to tune in to our next episode, which will cover stereotypes that target and affect teens and stereotypes on social media. Be sure to stay mindful of the topics we discussed with you today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every weekend, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you so much for listening.